The whistle of the train echoed through the valley as Annabelle Porter clutched her single valise, her knuckles white against the worn leather. The last thing my father would have wanted was for me to become some stranger's mail-order bride, she whispered to herself, the words disappearing into the billowing steam that enveloped the platform of Silver Creek Station, Colorado, 1878. The advertisement had seemed like salvation 3 months ago when she'd been desperate in Boston, her father freshly buried and creditors circling like vultures. Respectable rancher seeks educated Eastern lady for matrimony and companionship. Passage paid. Those simple words had been her escape route from a life of destitution, even if they led to a future she'd never imagined for herself. Annabelle smoothed down her navy traveling dress, the best she owned, and tried to look confident as passengers disembarked around her. She was searching the crowd for a man holding a sign with her name when a commotion near the station house caught her attention. "I don't care what your ledger says," a deep voice boomed. "The cattle were promised for yesterday's train. My men have been waiting since dawn." The station master, a small man with spectacles perched on his nose, backed away from the towering figure before him. "Mr. Knox, I understand your frustration, but the telegram states what some fool in Denver decided, not what was agreed upon." The tall man slammed his hand against the counter, causing several nearby women to gasp. Annabelle couldn't help but stare. The angry rancher stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a lean waist. His dark brown Stetson was pushed back on his head, revealing a strong face bronzed by the sun. Despite his evident rage, there was something compelling about him, a raw energy that seemed to command the very air around him. "Is that Mr. Harrington?" Annabelle asked a woman standing nearby, referring to her intended groom. The woman gave a short laugh. "That's Kieran Knox, owns the biggest spread in the county, not one for polite company, as you can see." Annabelle nodded her thanks and continued searching the platform. After 15 minutes, her optimism began to fade. The platform had nearly emptied and still no one had approached her. She sat on her valise, trying to ignore the growing pit in her stomach. "Miss Porter." She looked up to see a boy of about 12, his freckled face partially hidden beneath a too large hat. "Yes, that's me," she said, relief flooding her voice. "Mr. Harrington sent me to fetch you." The boy twisted his hands nervously. "I'm Tobias. I work at the general store, Mr. Harrington wants you to meet him there." Annabelle frowned. This wasn't the welcome she had expected. "I see. Well, lead on, Tobias." The boy grabbed her valise before she could protest and headed toward town. As they walked, Annabelle took in her first real view of Silver Creek. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with false-fronted buildings. Men in cowboy hats and women in practical calico moved with purpose. It was so different from Boston's cobblestone streets and brick townhouses. "Is it far to Mr. Harrington's ranch?" she asked, trying to make conversation. Tobias gave her an odd look. "About 3 miles outside town, madam." The general store stood in the center of town, its windows displaying everything from boots to bolts of fabric. As they entered, a bell jangled overhead. A thin man with receding hair looked up from behind the counter. "Ah, you must be Miss Porter." He came around, wiping his hands on his apron. "Gerald Harrington. Welcome to Silver Creek." Annabelle extended her hand, trying to hide her surprise. The man was at least 20 years older than she had anticipated, closer to 50 than 30. His handshake was limp, his palms soft. "Thank you for arranging my passage, Mr. Harrington. Your letters were most kind." Gerald's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, well, about that. There's been a slight change of plans. You see, my sister arrived unexpectedly from St. Louis last month." She's staying with me now, keeping house and such. Annabelle felt her stomach drop. I don't understand. What I'm saying, Miss Porter, is that my circumstances have changed. I no longer require a wife. He had the decency to look embarrassed. I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house for tonight. Tomorrow you can take the train back east. I'll cover the fare, of course. The blood drained from Annabelle's face. But I sold everything to come here. I have nowhere to return to. Gerald shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry for your troubles, Miss Porter, but a man has to do what's best for his family. My sister needs me more than I need a wife. You advertised for a bride. I responded in good faith. We corresponded for months. Annabelle fought to keep her voice steady. And now I'm offering you a free ticket home. Many would consider that generous. His tone hardened. Tobias, take Miss Porter's bag to Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house. Annabelle stood frozen as Gerald returned to his ledger, dismissing her as easily as if she were a traveling salesman. The humiliation burned worse than the panic rising in her chest. Mr. Harrington, she began again, but the store's bell jangled as the door opened behind her. Harrington, I need 20 pounds of nails and new wire cutters. The ones you sold me last month are all ready. The deep voice stopped abruptly. Annabelle turned to see the rancher from the train station filling the doorway, his imposing frame blocking the afternoon light. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin. Didn't mean to interrupt, he said, glancing between Annabelle and Gerald. Gerald brightened, clearly relieved by the distraction. Not at all, Knox, just finishing up here. I'll get your order ready. Kieran Knox's gaze lingered on Annabelle's face, noting her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Everything all right, madam? Perfectly fine, she said stiffly, unwilling to air her humiliation before a stranger. Gerald hurried around the counter. Miss Porter was just leaving. She's staying at the boarding house tonight before heading back east tomorrow. Something in Kieran's expression changed. Porter, the mail-order bride, Annabelle winced at the blunt description. I was under that impression, yes. Kieran turned to Gerald, his jaw tightening. You're sending her back, Gerald busied himself with gathering nails. My sister arrived, as you know. No need for a wife now. So you let this woman travel all the way from where are you from, Miss Porter? Boston, she supplied. All the way from Boston, only to turn her away. After she sold everything she owns based on your promise, Gerald's face reddened. It's not your concern, Knox. It becomes my concern when a man in my town behaves without honor. Kieran's voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable edge. This woman came here in good faith, and I'm sending her back in good faith. First-class ticket. Gerald's voice had taken on a wheedling quality. Kieran looked at Annabelle, really looked at her, taking in her quality dress, her educated speech, the proud way she held herself despite her obvious distress. Miss Porter, he said suddenly, are you still interested in becoming a wife in Silver Creek? Annabelle blinked in surprise. I came here with that intention, yes. Then I'd like to offer an alternative to returning east. He removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair. My housekeeper left 2 weeks ago to care for her sick mother. My ranch needs someone to manage the household. I'm offering you that position with fair wages for 3 months. If at the end of that time you wish to return east, I'll pay your fare. If you choose to stay in Silver Creek, you'll have had time to meet other potential suitors. Annabelle stared at him, searching for deceit in his expression but finding only straightforward honesty. You would hire me as your housekeeper, without references. You were acceptable as Harrington's wife without him meeting you. I figure that's reference enough for housekeeping. A faint smile touched his lips. Besides, I'm a fair judge of character, Miss Porter. You strike me as someone who doesn't give up easily. Gerald sputtered. Now see here, Knox. I believe Miss Porter can make her own decisions, Kieran said without looking at him. What do you say? Annabelle's mind raced. The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. It would give her time to consider her options, to learn about this town before committing herself. And this man, while intimidating, had just stood up for her when no one else would. I accept your offer, Mr. Knox, she said firmly. Though I should warn you that my cooking skills are limited to basics. His smile widened, transforming his stern features. We won't starve, Miss Porter. The important thing is that you'll have a fair chance here. He turned to the boy who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. Tobias, take Miss Porter's bag to my wagon instead. Gerald's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. You can't just... I believe I just did, Kieran said mildly, placing his hat back on his head. About those nails, Harrington. As Gerald reluctantly filled Kieran's order, Annabelle stood straighter, her chin lifting. This wasn't how she had imagined her arrival in Silver Creek, but perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. At the very least, she would have 3 months to prove her worth not as someone's mail-order bride, but as her own person. When they stepped outside, Kieran helped her into his wagon with a gentle hand. As they pulled away from the general store, Annabelle caught several townspeople watching with open curiosity. They'll talk, Kieran said, following her gaze. Small towns always do. What will they say? She asked. He glanced at her, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. They'll say Kieran Knox just claimed Gerald Harrington's mail-order bride for himself. His expression grew serious. But you should know, Miss Porter, that while you're under my roof, you'll be treated with nothing but respect. I believe you, she said, surprised to realize it was true. And please call me Annabelle. Annabelle, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. Welcome to Silver Creek. As the wagon rolled out of town toward the open country beyond, Annabelle felt something she hadn't expected, a flicker of hope. Perhaps her new life in the West wasn't going to be what she had planned, but it might just be what she needed. The Knox Ranch sprawled across the landscape, much larger than Annabelle had anticipated. As they crested a hill, she gasped at the sight of the main house, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, a large barn stood sentinel over corrals filled with horses. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Kieran's expression softened with evident pride. My father started with nothing but 100 acres and a dream. When he died 5 years ago, he left me 5,000 acres and the best cattle bloodlines in Colorado. He guided the wagon toward the house. It's a good life, but a demanding one. How many people work here? I have 8 full-time ranch hands, plus a foreman, Jacob Miller. During roundup and branding, we hire on extra help. He pulled the wagon to a stop. The house has been neglected since Mrs. Finch left. Annabelle suppressed a smile at his obvious discomfort. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Knox. Kieran, he corrected, jumping down and coming around to help her. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the leather and sun-warmed cotton of his shirt before he stepped back, clearing his throat. I'll show you inside, he said, retrieving her valise. The interior of the house was spacious but showed clear signs of bachelor living. Dishes were stacked haphazardly in the kitchen sink. Boots had been discarded by the door, and a thin layer of dust covered the surfaces. Your room will be upstairs, first door on the right, Kieran said, leading the way up a broad staircase. Mine is at the end of the hall. The other rooms are empty, though occasionally Jacob stays over if we're working late. The bedroom he showed her was surprisingly large, with a 4-poster bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the mountains to the west. The linens, while rumpled, appeared clean. "I'll let you settle in," Kieran said, placing her valise on the bed. "Supper's usually at 6, but given the circumstances, don't worry about cooking tonight. I can manage." "Nonsense," Annabelle said, removing her hat and gloves. "I'll need to familiarize myself with the kitchen anyway. Just give me half an hour to freshen up." A look of respect crossed his face. "As you wish. I'll be in the barn if you need anything." Once alone, Annabelle sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She had arrived expecting to be a wife by nightfall and instead found herself employed as a housekeeper to one of the most intimidating men she'd ever met. Yet there was something about Kieran Knox that inspired trust, despite his gruff exterior. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into a simpler dress, and tied an apron around her waist. Determined to make a good impression, she made her way to the kitchen to assess what she had to work with. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with staples: flour, sugar, coffee, and canned goods. She found potatoes, onions, and even some carrots in a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. A smokehouse behind the kitchen contained several hams and sides of bacon. By the time Kieran returned, Annabelle had prepared a simple but hearty meal of fried ham, potatoes, and biscuits. She'd also managed to clean the kitchen to a reasonable standard. Kieran stopped in the doorway, his expression one of pleasant surprise. "It smells like my mother's kitchen in here." "I hope that's a compliment," Annabelle said, placing the last of the biscuits in a cloth-lined basket. "The highest," he assured her, moving to wash his hands at the pump sink. She was the finest cook in 3 counties. They ate at the large kitchen table, the silence initially awkward but gradually easing into something more comfortable. Kieran ate with the appreciation of a man accustomed to his own cooking, which Annabelle took as a compliment. "Tell me about Boston," he said as they finished their meal. Annabelle described her life there, her father's position as a professor of literature, their small but comfortable home, the libraries and concerts she had enjoyed. She skimmed over the financial ruin that had followed his death, but Kieran seemed to understand what she left unsaid. "And what made you answer Harrington's advertisement?" he asked, his blue eyes intent on her face. She considered deflecting but decided on honesty. "Necessity, primarily, but also a desire for something different. My life in Boston was prescribed the daughter of a professor, destined to marry another academic or perhaps a lawyer. After my father died, I realized how little I had chosen for myself." She met his gaze directly. "Coming west was my choice, even if the circumstances were not ideal." Kieran nodded slowly. "The West is good for reinvention. Most folks here don't much care where you came from, only what you make of yourself now." "And what about you?" she asked. "Have you always been a rancher?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was away for a time. Fought in the war when I was barely 18. Saw things no boy should see." His voice grew distant. "Came back changed like we all did, but the ranch was still here and the land. It has a way of healing a man." Annabelle understood he was sharing something deeply personal, a gift of trust she hadn't expected so soon. "I'm sorry for what you endured," she said softly. He shrugged, the vulnerability disappearing behind his usual reserve. "It was a long time ago." He stood, gathering their plates. "I usually make a round of the property before turning in. Will you be all right here alone? Of course. I have plenty to keep me occupied." She gestured to the kitchen, which still needed considerable attention. "Don't work too late," he cautioned. "Dawn comes early on a ranch." After he left, Annabelle finished cleaning the kitchen, making lists of what needed to be done in the coming days. The house was large but manageable with systematic attention. She had just decided to retire when a knock at the back door startled her. A middle-aged man with graying hair stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, madam. Jacob Miller. I'm the foreman here." "Annabelle Porter," she introduced herself. "Please come in, Mr. Miller." He stepped inside, his weathered face curious but kind. "Boss told me about the situation in town. Wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." His concern touched her. "That's very thoughtful. I'm doing fine, thank you." Jacob nodded, clearly assessing her. "Mrs. Finch was with the boss for 15 years, left big shoes to fill." "I understand. I don't intend to replace her merely to help while I'm here." Something in her response seemed to satisfy him. "Good to hear. Ranch this size needs a woman's touch, but it also needs someone who understands what we do here." He gestured to the door. "If you need anything, my cabin's just beyond the bunkhouse. The boys won't bother you none. Kieran runs a tight ship, but holler if you have any trouble." After he left, Annabelle made her way upstairs, bone-tired but oddly content. Through her bedroom window, she could see Kieran's tall figure moving across the yard, lantern in hand, checking on his land before retiring. There was something reassuring about his vigilance, his clear commitment to his responsibilities. As she prepared for bed, Annabelle realized that for the first time since her father's death, she felt safe. This day had not gone as planned, not remotely, but perhaps Providence had a different path in mind for her. With that comforting thought, she slipped into a dreamless sleep. The next few days established a rhythm to life at the Knox Ranch. Annabelle rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Kieran and any hands who happened to be working nearby. The men ate heartily, their appreciation for her cooking evident in clean plates and mumbled thanks. After they departed for the day's work, she turned her attention to the house. Room by room, she battled dust and disorder, discovering in the process a home that had once been lovingly maintained. Behind the neglect, she found quality furnishings, family photographs, and small touches that spoke of the woman who had raised Kieran, a handmade quilt here, a collection of pressed wildflowers there. On her fourth day, while cleaning the study, she discovered a bookshelf filled with classics: Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau, and many others. She was running her fingers along the spines when Kieran's voice startled her. "My mother's collection," he said from the doorway. "She taught at the local school before marrying my father." Annabelle turned, a copy of Pride and Prejudice in her hands. "She had excellent taste." "She would have liked you," he said, the comment seeming to surprise even him. He quickly changed the subject. "I came to tell you I'm riding out to the north pasture. Won't be back until after dark." "I'll keep a plate warm for you," she promised. He nodded, hesitating as if he wanted to say more, then departed with a touch to the brim of his hat. As the days passed, Annabelle found herself watching for these brief interactions, these glimpses of the man beneath the rancher's stern exterior. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor, a profound respect for the land, and an unwavering sense of justice. The ranch hand spoke of his fairness as an employer and his skill with horses. Even in town, where she occasionally accompanied him for supplies, people treated him with a deference that went beyond his status as a major landowner. By the end of her second week, the house was transformed. Windows sparkled, floors shone, and fresh-cut wildflowers brightened the tables. She'd even tackled the neglected garden, coaxing vegetables from the fertile soil with daily attention. It was there, kneeling among the carrot tops, that Jacob found her one afternoon. "Miss Porter," he called, approaching with an unusual urgency in his step. "Boss needs you at the bunkhouse. One of the new hands got thrown bad this morning, busted his arm and got a nasty gash on his head." Annabelle hurried to her feet. "Has someone gone for the doctor?" "Sent Billy, but Doc Watson is out at the Thompson place delivering a baby." Could be hours. Inside the house, Annabelle quickly gathered supplies: clean linens, her sewing kit, whiskey for disinfecting, and a jar of honey for wound dressing, a remedy her grandmother had sworn by. At the bunkhouse, she found Kieran kneeling beside a young man laid out on a narrow bed, his face pale beneath his tan. "Annabelle," Kieran said, relief evident in his voice. "This is Alan Peterson. First day on the job, and the Bay gelding took exception to his handling." She knelt beside the injured cowboy, assessing the damage. His left arm was clearly broken, already swelling against his rolled-up sleeve. The gash on his forehead had bled profusely, as head wounds do, but looked worse than it probably was. "We need to clean and stitch that cut, then set the arm," she said with a calm she didn't entirely feel. She'd assisted the doctor who treated her father during his final illness, but had never handled such injuries alone. Kieran nodded, his faith in her apparent. "Tell me what to do." With his help, she cleaned the head wound while Jacob held the young man still. The whiskey made Alan howl when it hit the open cut, but Annabelle worked efficiently, her stitches small and even. The bone setting proved more challenging, requiring Kieran's strength to pull the arm straight while she guided the bones back into alignment. By the time they finished splinting it with strips of wood and clean bandages, all four of them were sweating. "You've done this before," Kieran said as they watched Alan drift into an exhausted sleep, aided by a generous dose of laudanum. "My grandmother was a midwife," Annabelle explained. "She taught me some basics of healing." They walked back to the main house together, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. "You're full of surprises, Annabelle Porter," Kieran said, his voice warm with admiration. "As are you," she replied. "I wouldn't have expected a rancher to have such a gentle touch with the injured. When you're responsible for men's lives, you learn what's needed." He stopped at the porch steps, turning to face her. "You've made a difference here already. The house, the men, even the garden is thriving." His praise brought unexpected heat to her cheeks. "I'm just doing what needs doing." His blue eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he cleared his throat and gestured to the door. "You should rest. It's been a long day." That night, Annabelle lay awake, replaying the moment on the porch, the way Kieran had looked at her not as an employee or even as a friend, but as a woman. It was a look that stirred feelings she hadn't expected, feelings that complicated her already uncertain situation. She had come to Silver Creek, expecting to be Gerald Harrington's wife, a practical arrangement born of necessity. She had not expected to find herself drawn to a man like Kieran Knox, whose very presence made her pulse quicken. Such feelings were dangerous when her position was so tenuous, when in less than 3 months she would need to decide whether to stay in Silver Creek or return east. Yet as the weeks passed, Annabelle found it increasingly difficult to maintain emotional distance. Kieran began inviting her to join him on evening rides around the property, showing her hidden creeks and meadows bursting with wildflowers. They talked easily about books, about his plans for the ranch, about her life in Boston. She met his neighbors at Sunday services and found herself warmly welcomed by most of the community, though Gerald Harrington pointedly avoided her, and his sister watched her with narrowed eyes. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Kieran mentioned a letter that had arrived that morning. "Mrs. Finch won't be returning," he said. "Her mother's health has worsened, and she's decided to stay in Missouri permanently." Annabelle nodded, unsurprised. "You'll need to find a replacement, or keep the one I have." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Your 3 months are half gone, Annabelle. Have you given thought to what comes after? The question hung between them, weighted with implications. I have, she admitted, but I'm not certain what my options truly are. You could stay on as housekeeper permanently with increased wages. He hesitated, then added, or there might be other arrangements to consider. Her heart quickened. What sort of arrangements? Before he could answer, the sound of approaching hooves interrupted them. Jacob appeared on horseback, his expression grim. Boss, we've got trouble. Cattle are missing from the east pasture, at least 30 head, found tracks heading toward Blackwater Canyon. Kieran was on his feet instantly. All traces of the personal conversation vanished. Rustlers, how fresh are the tracks? No more than a few hours. They'll be moving slow with that many cattle. Get the men. We ride in 15 minutes. Kieran turned to Annabelle, his expression apologetic but determined. I have to go. She nodded, understanding the severity of the situation. Cattle rustling was not just theft, it was a threat to the ranch's very survival. Be careful, she said, unable to hide her concern. He paused, then in a gesture that surprised them both, reached for her hand and pressed it briefly. Lock the doors tonight. Jacob's wife will come stay with you. If I send word, we'll be gone overnight. Annabelle watched from the porch as Kieran and 6 of his men rode out, rifles in their scabbards, determination in their postures. The conversation they'd been about to have, the other arrangements he'd mentioned, would have to wait. That night stretched endlessly. Though Martha Miller, Jacob's wife, arrived with a bundle of knitting and reassurances, Annabelle found sleep elusive. Every sound from outside sent her to the window, searching the darkness for returning riders. They came back just after dawn, tired and dusty but successful. Kieran found Annabelle in the kitchen preparing breakfast. We recovered the cattle, he said, accepting the coffee she offered. Caught 2 of the rustlers, sheriffs taking them to the county jail. Were you hurt? She asked, noting the way he held himself stiffly. Just saddle sore and in need of sleep. He drained his coffee and set the cup down. I'll wash up, then get some rest. Don't worry about lunch for me. Annabelle watched him climb the stairs, concern etched on her face. Martha, preparing to leave now that the men had returned safely, gave her a knowing look. He works too hard, the older woman said. Always has, even as a boy. That ranch is his life. He seems to have little time for anything else, Annabelle agreed. Martha's eyes twinkled. Perhaps. But I've noticed he finds time for evening rides these days. Jacob says he's never seen the boss take such an interest in showing anyone the property. The implication brought warmth to Annabelle's cheeks. He's been kind to show me around, given that I'm new to the area. Kind, yes, Martha said, gathering her things. Though I suspect there's more than kindness motivating Kieran Knox where you're concerned. After Martha left, Annabelle busied herself with household tasks, trying not to dwell on the older woman's words or on the interrupted conversation from the previous evening. What other arrangements had Kieran been about to suggest? The question lingered in her mind as she went about her day. Kieran slept until late afternoon, emerging from his room looking refreshed but still moving with care. As he came down the stairs, Annabelle noticed him wince slightly. You were injured, she accused, abandoning the dough she'd been kneading. It's nothing. One of the rustlers got in a lucky punch. He tried to wave off her concern, but she was already at his side. Let me see, she insisted. With reluctance, he lifted his shirt to reveal a large bruise spreading across his ribs on the left side. Annabelle drew in a sharp breath. You should have told me. I have arnica that would help with the bruising. I've had worse, he said, but allowed her to retrieve the salve from her room. In the kitchen, he sat at the table while she gently applied the ointment to his injured side. The intimate act of tending to him, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, created a charged silence between them. "About yesterday," he began, his voice lower than usual. What I was trying to say, the front door burst open, startling them both. Tobias, the boy from town, stood in the doorway, breathless and wide-eyed. "Mr. Knox, there's a big fight at the saloon. Sheriff sent me to fetch you, says there's trouble with the rustler's friends." Kieran was already on his feet, reaching for his gun belt. "Tell the sheriff I'm coming." He glanced at Annabelle, frustration evident in his expression. "I'm sorry. This conversation seems destined to be interrupted." "Go," she said, understanding the urgency. "Be careful with those ribs." He paused at the door, his gaze holding hers. "This isn't finished, Annabelle. When I return, we will talk." But when he returned hours later, he brought news that pushed personal matters aside once again. The confrontation in town had escalated into something more serious. Threats had been made against the Knox ranch by friends of the captured rustlers. "Jacob's doubling the night patrols," Kieran explained as they sat in the kitchen, the clock ticking past midnight. "I don't think they'll try anything, but we can't take chances." "How long will this go on?" Annabelle asked, concerned by the dark circles under his eyes. "Until the trial next week. Once those men are sentenced, their friends will likely move on." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of weariness. "I'm sorry this is happening while you're here. Don't apologize. This is your life protecting what's yours." She hesitated, then added softly, "I admire your dedication, Kieran." His expression softened. "There was a time when all I cared about was expanding the ranch, adding more land, more cattle, success measured in acres and head counts." He looked at her directly. "Lately, I've been thinking there might be more to life than that." The implication in his words made her heart beat faster. "Such as," he leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Such as sharing it with someone who understands its value, someone who sees the beauty in this land the way I do." Before she could respond, a shot rang out in the distance, followed by shouting. Kieran was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he'd leaned against the wall. "Stay inside." "Lock the doors," he ordered, all tenderness gone from his voice, replaced by the hard edge of a man preparing for danger. As he disappeared into the night, Annabelle moved to the window, strained to see what was happening. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness near the corrals, and men's voices carried on the night air. More shots followed, making her flinch. Unable to sit idle while Kieran and his men faced danger, she retrieved the shotgun she knew was kept in the pantry. Her father had taught her to shoot years ago, believing every educated person should know how to handle a firearm. Positioning herself by the kitchen window that overlooked the yard, she watched and waited, prepared to defend the house if necessary. The confrontation lasted nearly an hour. From what she could gather, several men had attempted to set fire to the barn but had been spotted by the night watchman. In the ensuing exchange of gunfire, one of the intruders had been wounded, and the others had fled. When Kieran finally returned to the house, his expression was grim but relieved to find her safe. "They're gone. Jacob's taking the wounded man to town for the doctor to see to before he goes to jail." "Was anyone else hurt?" she asked, lowering the shotgun. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the weapon in her hands. "No, just property damage." He approached slowly, taking the gun from her. "Where did you learn to handle one of these?" "My father believed in practical education," she explained. "I'm not a particularly good shot, but I know which end is which." A smile tugged at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "You continue to surprise me, Annabelle Porter." "Is that a good thing?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. He set the shotgun aside and stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "It's a very good thing." His voice had dropped to a near whisper. I find myself thinking about you at the most inopportune moments. When I'm checking fences or negotiating cattle prices, I wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking." Annabelle's breath caught in her throat. "I've been having similar difficulties concentrating." His hand came up to touch her cheek, the calluses on his palm rough against her skin. "I was trying to tell you yesterday. I don't want you to stay on as my housekeeper." Her heart sank momentarily until he continued. "I want you to consider becoming my wife." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Annabelle searched his face, finding sincerity in his blue eyes. "We've known each other such a short time," she said softly. "I knew the first day when you stood in Harrington's store with your chin up, refusing to be defeated." His thumb traced her jawline. "I knew when I saw you stitch up Alan's wound without flinching. I knew when I watched you bring life back to this house, making it a home again." "Kieran," she whispered, her heart pounding. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said. "You still have time left in your 3 months. Use it to be certain. But know that when I look at my future now, I see you in it." With gentle deliberation, he lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a demand. Annabelle answered by leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest as the kiss deepened into something that spoke of promises and possibilities. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I should go help the men secure the property," he said reluctantly. "I'll be here when you return," she promised. As he walked back into the night, Annabelle touched her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. She had come to Silver Creek, expecting an arranged marriage of convenience with a stranger. Instead, she had found something she hadn't believed existed, a connection that ran deeper than practicality, a feeling that made her heart race and her spirit soar. The following weeks brought both challenges and clarifications. The Rustlers' trial proceeded as scheduled, resulting in prison sentences that seemed to discourage further retaliation against the Knox Ranch. Life gradually returned to normal, though Kieran maintained extra vigilance in protecting his property and Annabelle. Their relationship evolved with cautious joy. Kieran courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers picked during his rounds of the property, took her on picnics to his favorite spots in the hills, and each evening they shared conversation on the porch as the sun set. The town noticed the change in their relationship. When they attended Sunday services together, sitting side by side in the Knox family pew, whispers followed them. Most were approving Kieran was respected, and Annabelle had proven herself a capable, kind-hearted woman during her time in Silver Creek. A few, however, watched with disapproval, chief among them Gerald Harrington and his pinch-faced sister. "They're saying I stole you away," Kieran commented one Sunday as they drove home from church. "Harrington's sister has been telling anyone who'll listen that I intercepted his mail-order bride." Annabelle laughed, the sound carried away on the summer breeze. "He rejected me before you even made your offer. Besides, I was never his to begin with." Kieran's hands tightened on the reins. "No, you weren't." He glanced at her, his expression serious despite the lightness of their conversation. "You don't belong to anyone but yourself, Annabelle. That's something I admire about you, your independence. Yet you've asked me to be your wife," she pointed out. "Some would say that's a form of belonging to someone. Not the way I see it." He guided the wagon around a bend in the road. "Marriage should be a partnership, not ownership. My parents taught me that." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "My parents had that kind of marriage. I never thought I would find it for myself." "Have you?" he asked, the question simple but loaded with meaning. "Found it, I mean." Annabelle looked at him, this strong, principled man who had offered her shelter when she needed it most, who had seen her value from the beginning, who kissed her as if she were precious beyond measure. "I believe I have," she said softly. His smile was radiant, transforming his usually serious face. "Does that mean you're accepting my proposal?" "It means I'm strongly considering it," she teased, though they both knew her heart had already decided. As July turned to August, Annabelle's 3-month period of employment neared its end. The question of her future loomed, though in truth, the answer had become increasingly clear. She belonged at the Knox Ranch not as a housekeeper, but as Kieran's wife and partner. On the evening marking exactly 3 months since her arrival in Silver Creek, Kieran suggested a ride to the highest point on his property, a mesa overlooking the valley. "There's something I want to show you," he said, helping her mount the gentle mare he had chosen for her. They rode in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. When they reached the mesa, Kieran helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "Look there," he said, pointing toward a cluster of trees near a bend in the creek that gave the town its name. Annabelle squinted, then gasped as she made out a structure taking shape among the cottonwoods. "Is that a house?" Kieran confirmed. "I've had men working on it for the past month. It's small now, just 4 rooms, but designed to expand as needed." He turned to face her fully. "It's for us, Annabelle, if you'll have me." Tears welled in her eyes at the gesture, this tangible proof of his commitment, his belief in their future together. "You built us a home. I want to start fresh, not have you living in the house I grew up in, the house my parents shared." He took her hands in his. "I want us to build our life together from the foundation up." Annabelle looked from the distant house back to Kieran's face, reading the love and hope written there. In that moment, all doubts vanished. This was where she belonged with this man in this place. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Knox." His smile was brilliantly bright as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, his kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would share. "When?" he asked when they finally parted. "As soon as the house is finished," she decided. "I want to start our marriage in our own home." He nodded, understanding the symbolism of her choice. 2 more weeks, then. The roof goes on tomorrow." As they rode back to the ranch, the setting sun at their backs, Annabelle felt a profound sense of rightness. She had come to Colorado seeking security through marriage to a stranger. Instead, she had found love with a man who valued her for exactly who she was. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Martha Miller organized a gathering of local women to present Annabelle with quilts and household items for her new home. The ranch hands, gruff men unaccustomed to expressing sentiment, showed their approval by working extra hours on the new house, adding thoughtful details like built-in bookshelves and a garden plot already turned and fertilized. Even in town, most people expressed genuine happiness for the couple. Gerald Harrington, however, made a point of crossing the street to avoid them, his resentment evident in the set of his shoulders. "He's just embarrassed," Jacob explained when Annabelle mentioned it. "Town hasn't forgotten how he treated you. Makes him look bad that the woman he rejected is marrying the most eligible bachelor in the county." Annabelle dismissed Gerald from her thoughts, focusing instead on preparations for her wedding and new home. The date was set for the first Saturday in September, with the ceremony to take place on the porch of their new house, followed by a celebration that would include the entire community. As the day approached, Annabelle found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a grief-stricken daughter facing destitution in Boston. Now she was about to become the wife of a man she deeply loved, the mistress of a successful ranch, a respected member of a community that had embraced her. The night before the wedding, as she packed the last of her belongings in preparation for the move to their new home, Kieran knocked softly on her bedroom door. "May I come in?" he asked, remaining respectfully in the doorway. Annabelle nodded, setting aside the dress she'd been folding. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect," he assured her, entering the room but maintaining a proper distance. "I just wanted to give you something before tomorrow." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a gold band set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "My father gave it to her when he asked her to come west with him. She always said the sapphires reminded her of the Colorado sky." Annabelle's breath caught at the beauty of the ring and the meaning behind it. "Kieran, it's beautiful." "I had it sized for you," he said, removing it from the box. "May I?" She extended her left hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the gold warm against her skin. "Tomorrow, I'll place it there again in front of witnesses," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "But tonight I wanted a moment that was just for us." Annabelle looked up at him, this man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. "I love you, Kieran Knox." It was the first time she had said the words aloud, though they had been in her heart for weeks. His blue eyes darkened with emotion as he drew her into his arms. "And I love you, Annabelle Porter." His kiss was gentle yet filled with promise. "By this time tomorrow, you'll be Annabelle Knox." "I like the sound of that," she whispered against his lips. He reluctantly released her, propriety demanding that he leave her room despite their imminent marriage. "I'll see you tomorrow at our house." "I'll be the one in white," she teased after he left. Annabelle stood by the window, gazing out at the starlit landscape that had become her home. In the distance, she could just make out the silhouette of their new house, waiting for them to fill it with life and love. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Martha and several other women helped Annabelle dress in the back bedroom of the new house, which had been completed just days before. Her gown was simple but elegant cream-colored silk ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Martha had contributed from her own wedding dress. "Something borrowed," the older woman had said with misty eyes. Through the window, Annabelle could see guests arriving ranch hands in their Sunday best, townspeople in buggies and wagons, even a few travelers staying at the hotel who had been invited to join the celebration. The yard had been transformed with tables set beneath the cottonwoods, lanterns hanging from branches in preparation for the evening festivities. "It's time," Martha announced as the minister's buggy pulled up. "Are you ready, my dear?" Annabelle took a deep breath, her hand touching the ring Kieran had given her the night before. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." They made their way to the front of the house, where Jacob waited to escort her onto the porch. As they rounded the corner, Annabelle's eyes immediately found Kieran, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face alight with love as he saw her. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran's kiss was restrained but tender, mindful of their audience yet conveying his devotion. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was dancing to fiddle music, abundant food prepared by the women of the community, and toasts to the couple's happiness. As darkness fell, the lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. "Are you happy, Mrs. Knox?" Kieran asked as they shared a quiet moment away from their guests, standing near the creek that would forever flow past their home. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe how everything has turned out. No regrets about not returning east." His tone was light, but she sensed the genuine question beneath. Annabelle looked up at him, this man who had claimed her heart so unexpectedly. "My life is here now, with you." His kiss was deeper this time, uninhibited by watching eyes, a husband's kiss to his wife. When they returned to their guests, Jacob winked knowingly at Kieran's slightly rumpled appearance. As the evening wound down, the last guests departed with final congratulations, leaving the newlyweds alone in their new home. Kieran closed the door behind the last visitor, then turned to Annabelle with a smile that made her heart race. "Finally," he said softly, crossing to where she stood by the fireplace. "I've been waiting all day to have you to myself." Annabelle felt a blush rise to her cheeks despite her anticipation. "It was a beautiful wedding." "It was," he agreed, reaching to unpin her hair, watching as it fell in waves around her shoulders. "But this is what I've been thinking about since the moment I saw you in that general store." His confession surprised her. Even then," he confirmed, his fingers gentle as they traced the curve of her cheek. "I took one look at you standing there with your head held high despite Harrington's rejection, and something in me just knew." "Knew what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you were meant to be mine." His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "Not as a mail-order bride, not as a housekeeper, but as my wife, my partner, my heart." In the soft glow of the fire, Kieran kissed her with all the love and longing that had built between them, his touch gentle yet certain as he guided her toward their bedroom, the beginning of their life together. 10 years later, Annabelle stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Kieran taught their 8-year-old son, James, to ride his new pony. Their 6-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, sat beside Annabelle, carefully stitching a sampler with her grandmother's favorite saying. "Home is where love grows." The Knox Ranch had prospered over the decade, growing in size and reputation under their joint stewardship. Annabelle had brought her own contributions, establishing a small library in town, organizing a school that now had 3 teachers, and introducing breeding techniques she'd read about in agricultural journals. Silver Creek had grown as well, the railroad bringing new residents and opportunities. Gerald Harrington had eventually sold his store and moved to Denver, unable to face the daily reminder of his poor judgment. In his place, a young couple now ran the establishment, friendly partners in the community's development. "Mama, look." Elizabeth called as James successfully guided his pony in a small circle, Kieran's hand hovering protectively nearby. "Well done, James," Annabelle called, her heart swelling with pride and love. Kieran looked up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 10 years of marriage, that simple connection still sent warmth through her. He smiled, the same smile that had first given her hope when she'd arrived in Silver Creek as a desperate woman with nowhere to go. As the afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Annabelle reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. She had come west seeking security, but had found so much more love, purpose, family, community. The mail-order bride who never made it to her intended groom had instead found her true destination. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset after the children had been tucked into bed, Kieran took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding ring he had placed there a decade ago. "Any regrets, Mrs. Knox?" he asked, an echo of the question he'd posed on their wedding night. Annabelle leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "Not a single one. You," his arm tightened around her. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," she said with the wisdom of the years they'd shared. As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on the porch, watching the stars appear over the land they both loved. Annabelle Porter Knox, once bound for a marriage of convenience, had instead found a love story more beautiful than any she could have imagined, one written not in the pages of her beloved books, but in the life she and Kieran had built together in the wild, wonderful West.